Now, joining us is President of the Australian Jewish Association, David Adler. Now, we've certainly covered this topic this morning, but it's because it has to be covered. I want to ask you, David, thanks for coming on Outsiders.
Thank you, Ron.
Anthony Albanese says, anti-Semitism, it's always been there, it's kind of rising, but, was that sufficient response to the firebombing of a synagogue from the Prime Minister of Australia?
Look, Anthony Albanese, and in fact this government, has been outrageously negligent in calling out the issue and in dealing with it. It is a totally inadequate response, just words, no action again. And he's also said, you might recall, there is no room for anti-Semitism in Australia. And indeed, this government has created a lot of room for anti-Semitism. We see it on the streets of Sydney and Melbourne. We see it in blockades and attacks on our synagogues. We see it on attacks on Jewish businesses and graffiti over the place. We see it on the university campuses, and in none of those areas has it been dealt with adequately. So there has been a shift in the feeling within the Jewish community. You've got a sense of that during your program today. It's not just shock and disappointment. There is now a visceral anger at this government. And I hope that all reasonable Australians will find that what's happened with the crisis of anti-Semitism, and it's not just attacking Jews, it's also attacking Christian events, the Maya shop windows, the carols by candlelight last year, the attack on Bishop Mari Emanuel. This is destroying Australian society. It is compromising our security. We are very angry about it.
I want to specifically ask you, because I think a lot of people go, United Nations, what's happening there? Yeah, Australia votes or abstains or whatever. Just explain the Penny Wong actions, specifically regarding the two United Nations resolutions that Australia would never have voted for in the past. Albanese said that nothing would change from previous administrations. Why are they so significant? Explain what they mean so that the average Aussie gets it.
Well, what's happening here is a radical shift in Australia's foreign policy away from an ally, away from the only country in the Middle East that shares values similar to Australia, freedom of religion, human rights, etc., and supporting, in effect, those that are aligned with terrorist organisations. It is part of a program of the delegitimisation of Israel, and Jewish identity and the land of Israel are inseparable. There are some people who try to separate it, including, to their great disgrace, some left-wing Jews, but there are certain aspects of the practice of Judaism which can only be done in the land of Israel. There is a major part of the Jewish mission, which is to do things in the Holy Land. It was divinely provided. And people like Penny Wong are undermining the value system, they're undermining the state of Israel, they're undermining, therefore, Jewish identity and helping to make Jews in Australia a legitimate target.
Rita.
You can't see this trend shifting very quickly, though, because, like you've said, this didn't just happen in recent days. There's a whole demographic shift that's happened. There's an ideological shift. We've had decades of indoctrination at schools that's added to this phenomenon. So what do you see as the fight back? Where does that start in any meaningful way?
Well, a number of members of the Jewish community have already made plans to leave Australia. I don't share that point of pessimism. And, I know people that have bought property overseas and that have made plans which are now not reversible. But I said there are two events which might have a chance of creating the turnaround. The first event, of course, was the US presidential election. And some of the policies articulated by President Trump and his appointees are fantastic. They have a chance of turning things around if they can implement those policies. And we're actually hoping there'll be some flow through to Australia. And while we're not an overtly political organisation, we are calling out this Labor government as the most hostile that has ever existed in Australia, not just to Israel, but to the interests of the Jewish community. And some internal polls have shown a massive shift in political sentiment in the Jewish community. I don't know how scientific it was, but a poll done by the Australian Jewish News a couple of months ago showed 77% support for the LNP.
Well, Alex, I think it's probably higher. Have a look at this grab of Peter Dutton just speaking this morning.
This is an act of terrorism, pure and simple, and I think the Prime Minister's deliberate decision to seek political advantage over the course of the last 12 months on this issue and play to a domestic audience of Green voters, I think has been deplorable and one of the worst things I've ever seen in public life. Prime Minister took a deliberate decision 13 months ago to play down the level of anti-Semitism in the community, and the government's policies right up to this very day have made it less safe for people of Jewish faith in our country.
David, I absolutely respect the fact you say that you don't want the AJA, the Australian Jewish Association, to be overtly political, and you've always stood by that. Sometimes you can't help it. But speaking from my point of view, and I know Rita's point of view, we've spoken at various Jewish events over the past few years where I certainly have repeatedly said that the Jewish community needs Donald Trump and needs a coalition government in this country. That without those two factors, there are risks. I was laughed and poo-pooed frequently for making those comments, but I still made them. I believe that what many in the Jewish community fail, or maybe they realise it now, but failed to realise for a long time, is that the modern left wing is not the left wing of the old blue-collar working classes, the old Bob Hawke Labor, etc. Bob Hawke was a great friend of the Jews. That the reality is that modern left-wing thinking is antipathetic towards Israel, full stop. So that's it. It's embedded in modern left-wing thinking.
Rowan, I will get a little political if you'll allow me.
Please go, please.
I'll call out 4 members of the government who have caused the most damage on this issue. One, of course, is the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who should have, on the 8th of October last year, called out the immediate celebrations and hate preaching that occurred. On the 9th of October, when we had those disgraceful anti-Semitic riots in front of the Opera House, we should have had him insisting on the enforcement of law. There is high-resolution CCTV all around the Opera House. They can do facial recognition and find those people. They've chosen not to. Penny Wong has driven Australia's foreign policy to be amongst the most toxic in the world, way worse than the Biden-Harris administration, which is saying something. Tony Burke is rushing into this country people who have had their entire education of brainwashing for hatred and glorification.
This is the Gazans that we're bringing in, and another 800, I believe, were announced.
And Jason Clare is supposed to be an education minister, but he has totally ignored the massive anti-Semitism on the university campuses. If it was 18 months or 2 years from an election, there'd be a good argument to call for the resignation of those 4 people. But now it's very soon going to be in the hands of the Australian people, and we hope they make a wise decision.
I have faith that they will. David Adler, thank you so much for coming on. Outside is always great to see you.